Wendell Ashcombe 3 came home that afternoon to fire the housekeeper. He left, 40 minutes later, with tears in his eyes, because his daughter had just called him daddy for the first time in 2 years. It started with a phone call. He was in the middle of closing a 9-figure freight contract in downtown Charlotte when his phone lit up with the number for Thornbury House, his family's estate outside Asheville. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then he saw his mother's name attached to it and knew it couldn't wait. "Wendell, you need to come home right now." Beatrice Ashcombe's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "That new housekeeper, Marisol, or whatever her name is, has completely lost control of herself. The kitchen looks like a tornado went through it. Flour everywhere. She's dragged the twins into the middle of it. Fire her the second you walk through that door." Wendell felt his jaw tighten. "I'm on my way." He broke every speed limit on I-40 getting there. 2 years since his wife Celeste had died on that same stretch of highway, and in those 2 years his 7-year-old twins, Odette and Osric, had become something like ghosts in their own home, silent, unreachable, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. 11 nannies had come and gone. 6 psychologists, one flown in from Boston at $800 an hour, had produced nothing but binders of notes. The last thing those children needed was a reckless new hire making things worse. He stormed through the front doors of Thornbury House ready to end Marisol Vance's employment on the spot. He marched toward the kitchen, jaw set, already composing the words in his head. Then he opened the door, and the words left him completely. White flour covered every surface. Dough sat in uneven lumps across the marble island. The floor looked like it had been hit by a small, indoor blizzard. And none of that was what stopped him cold. It was the sound. Laughter, his son's laughter, a sound Wendell hadn't heard in 2 years, ringing out over the kitchen like something returned from the dead. Osric stood at the island in a flour-dusted apron, grinning at a lump of dough he insisted was a dinosaur. Odette stood beside him, giggling behind her hand, flour caught in her dark hair like snow. And in the middle of it all was a young woman he barely recognized, sleeves pushed up, cheeks streaked white, laughing along with them like she had no idea the world outside that kitchen existed. She noticed him first. Her face went pale. "Mr. Ashcombe, I'm so sorry, I should have asked before." "Daddy!" The room went silent except for that one word. Odette's voice. Wendell's daughter, who had not spoken his name in 2 years, who had gone silent the day her mother's car left the road, ran across the kitchen floor and threw her arms around his waist. Wendell knelt down without thinking, without breathing, and held her. Over her shoulder, he could see his mother standing frozen in the doorway, one hand pressed to her chest. "What," Beatrice said slowly, "is going on in here?" Marisol lowered her eyes but didn't apologize again. "I asked if they wanted to help me bake," she said simply. "That's all I did." Wendell didn't fire her that day. He couldn't have, even if he'd wanted to, not with his daughter's face buried in his shoulder, not with his son grinning at a dough dinosaur, not with 2 years of silence cracking open in a single flour-covered afternoon. What he didn't know yet, what none of them knew yet, was that this moment was not the ending of the story. It was only the first door opening. There were others still shut, deeper in the house, deeper in his children, that would take a great deal more than flour and cookies to reach. And there was someone in that house determined to keep those doors closed for good. To understand why that afternoon mattered so much, you have to understand what came before it. Celeste Ashcombe died on a rain-slicked curve of I-40 42 years earlier, and something in her children died with her, not literally, but close enough that the family doctors struggled to describe it any other way. Odette and Osric, 5 years old at the time, stopped speaking except when absolutely necessary. They stopped making eye contact. They stopped reaching for anyone, including their own father. 11 nannies had tried and failed to break through. 6 psychologists had produced diagnoses that changed nothing. Wendell had buried himself in Ashcombe freight and logistics, telling himself he was providing for his children, when in truth he was avoiding the 2 silent faces waiting for him at home every night, faces that reminded him, every time he looked at them, of everything he hadn't said to Celeste before she died. Beatrice had her own theory, and she repeated it often: the children needed someone with pedigree, someone who understood old families, not staff hired off an agency roster. She'd spent months parading a rotation of eligible young women through Thornbury House: Genevieve Pruitt, a Wellesley graduate with a practiced warmth, a Vanderbilt cousin twice removed, hoping one of them might reach the twins, and, not so subtly, reach her son. All of them failed. The twins looked through every one of them exactly the way they looked through the housekeepers Beatrice fired in frustration every few months. Marisol Vance hadn't come to Thornbury House hoping to succeed where all of them had failed. She'd come because rent was due, because her 19-year-old brother Teo needed help with his community college applications, because the agency paid triple what she made cleaning offices before dawn. She had no interest in the Ashcombe fortune and even less patience for two rich kids who'd made a sport of freezing people out. On her second day, scrubbing grout and humming an old, half-remembered song her mother used to sing, she hadn't noticed Osric in the doorway until he sat down across from her and started humming along, a beat behind, trying to catch the tune. She didn't make it a miracle. She didn't call anyone over, didn't treat the moment like the breakthrough every doctor in that house would have called it. She just patted the tile beside her and said, "You're behind, kid. Catch up." And somehow, that was exactly the thing no one else had thought to do. By the end of that first week, Odette had walked a folded drawing into the staff room and left it on top of a pile of towels without a word, two stick figures with brown hair and one with yellow hair, holding hands, and off to the side, a fourth figure with dark hair drawn into the family. Wendell had seen it from the hallway and felt something crack open in his chest he didn't have words for yet. That evening he found Marisol in the kitchen, wiping down counters that had, days earlier, been buried in flour. "How did you do it?" he asked. "I've had specialists flown in from Boston. None of them got a word out of my son. You've been here 5 days. "I listened," Marisol said. "Everyone in this house talks at them. Doctors ask questions like it's an interview. Nannies give instructions. Nobody just sits next to them and doesn't need anything from them." Wendell was quiet for a long moment. "They told you about their mother." Marisol's expression softened, but she didn't flinch from it. "Osric mentioned her, once, while we were baking. He said everybody in this house gets sad when they talk about her, so nobody talks about her anymore, which made him feel like he wasn't allowed to be sad about her either." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "There's something else, Mr. Ashcombe." He said it fast, like he wasn't supposed to say it at all, and then he got quiet again. "He said he remembers hearing you and his mom arguing, right before the accident. He thinks that's part of why nobody talks about her. Like it's a secret everyone's protecting." Wendell felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. He and Celeste had argued the morning she left for Asheville, a stupid, forgettable fight about nothing, the kind every marriage survives 1,000 times over, and he had never once considered that his children might have heard it. Might have spent 2 years carrying it as some private, unspoken wound, convinced their silence was protecting a secret no one else even remembered was a secret at all. "I didn't know they heard that," he said quietly. "I don't think they know how to tell you they heard it," Marisol said. "I think that's the real reason they stopped talking. Not just grief. Guilt. Like if they never speak again, they can't accidentally say the wrong thing and make it worse." It was, Wendell would realize later, the moment the ground beneath his understanding of his own children shifted for good. He had spent 2 years believing they were simply lost in grief. He hadn't considered that some part of them believed they were guarding a wound he didn't even know was open. That same week, Marisol mentioned, almost in passing, that her brother Teo had a community college admissions interview coming up and was terrified of it, not because he wasn't ready, but because he'd never learned how to talk about himself without shrinking. Wendell could have written a check. He could have called in a favor with a dean he knew from a fundraising dinner. Instead, 3 evenings in a row, he drove to the small apartment above the laundromat and sat at Teo's kitchen table, running mock interview questions with him like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, refusing every time Teo tried to thank him for it. "You didn't have to do that," Marisol told him afterward, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, though there was something different in her voice than there had been before. I know, Wendell said. I wanted to. There's a difference. It was a small thing, in the scope of everything else happening at Thornbury House. But Marisol noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly and completely. He hadn't offered money. He hadn't tried to solve her brother's nerves with his name or his checkbook. He had simply shown up, 3 nights in a row, and sat in an uncomfortable kitchen chair asking a 19-year-old about his goals like they mattered. It was the same thing she'd been trying to teach him to do with his own children. He'd just quietly started doing it with hers. The following months brought a kind of thaw Wendell hadn't dared to hope for. He cleared his calendar for breakfasts. He made pancakes badly and let Osric drown them in too much syrup. Marisol, without ever making it a production, helped the twins start talking about Celeste again, baking her favorite lemon cake on what would have been her birthday, planting the daffodils she used to grow along the garden wall, letting Odette keep a small wooden box of her mother's things on her nightstand instead of locked away in a closet where Beatrice had insisted it belonged. "You're not replacing her," Wendell said to Marisol one evening, watching Odette carefully arrange a photograph of Celeste inside the memory box. "I know," Marisol said. "I'm just making room so they don't have to carry her alone." Beatrice watched all of it from a careful distance, and her disapproval did not soften, if anything, it sharpened. She began inviting a specialist of her own choosing to the estate, Dr. Preston Yates, a well-credentialed child psychologist from Atlanta with 3 books on attachment theory to his name. Dr. Yates observed the twins with Marisol for 2 sessions and delivered his verdict to Beatrice in Wendell's study, though he made certain Wendell was in the room to hear it. "What you're describing is not healing," Dr. Yates said. "It's dependency. The children have transferred their unresolved grief onto a single caregiver with no professional training, no long-term stability, no credentials to manage what could easily become a much larger crisis if she ever leaves. I'd strongly recommend a structured transition away from her before that attachment becomes unmanageable." "They're talking again," Wendell said. "They're laughing. They're sleeping through the night." "For now," Dr. Yates said. "But dependency built on one unqualified person is a fragile foundation, Mr. Ashcombe. I've seen it collapse before. Usually all at once." Wendell didn't believe it. Not really. But the seed was planted, and Beatrice, sensing an opening, watered it carefully over the following weeks, mentioning Dr. Yates's warning at every dinner, reminding Wendell of the agency contract's approaching end, reminding him, gently and relentlessly, of what the Ashcombe name required of the woman raising his children. "I'm not asking you to fire her," Beatrice said one evening, choosing her words with the precision of a woman who had spent 40 years getting exactly what she wanted from rooms full of powerful men. "I'm asking you to think, for once, like the head of this family instead of a man who's lonely and grateful. What happens in 10 years, Wendell, when Odette is a teenager and Marisol has moved on to some other family, some other house that needs saving? You will have built your children's entire recovery on a foundation that was never going to last, and when it collapses, it will take them down with it. I watched you disappear into your grief once already. I held this family together while you did. I am not willing to watch it happen a second time because you'd rather trust a housekeeper's instincts than your own mother's experience." It was, Wendell had to admit, the only argument of his mother's that ever truly landed, because beneath the class prejudice and the careful cruelty, there was something almost true in it, a genuine, if twisted, fear of losing her grandchildren to grief a second time, dressed up as concern for propriety because Beatrice had never learned another language to speak her fear in. He told her, that night, that he understood her fear but didn't share a solution. He didn't yet understand how far she was willing to go to prove herself right. What Wendell didn't know was that his mother had already decided to solve the problem herself. The weeks leading up to Founders' Day were, on the surface, some of the happiest the estate had seen in years. Odette had started drawing again constantly, not just the family portrait, but whole worlds, dragons, and gardens and, more than once, a small figure she labeled Mom floating somewhere near the edge of the page, present without needing to explain herself. Osric had taken to following Marisol into the garden every evening to check on the daffodils, counting the green shoots as though counting down to something. Wendell found himself, for the first time in 2 years, looking forward to the gala instead of dreading it, a chance, he thought, to finally stop hiding the shape his family had actually become. He should have noticed how quiet Beatrice had gone. He should have noticed Dr. Yates's continued presence at the estate, his clipboard visits growing more frequent, his conversations with the household staff growing longer. He noticed none of it. He was too busy, for the first time in years, being happy. The Ashcombe Freight and Logistics Founders' Day Gala was held on the lawn of Thornbury House every year, a black-tie fundraiser for the company's charitable foundation, attended by half the business elite of Charlotte and half the old families of Asheville, with a small army of press photographers stationed near the entrance. It was, Beatrice knew, the one event where a public embarrassment would carry the most weight, and the most consequences. 3 days before the gala, Osric came down with a sudden, frightening allergic reaction after eating a snack in the kitchen, hives, swelling, a struggle to breathe that sent the household into a full panic before an EpiPen and a rushed trip to the hospital brought it under control. It turned out to be a walnut hidden in a batch of granola bars, an ingredient no one had flagged on the label. Marisol had been the one to spot the hives first, the one to grab the EpiPen from the emergency kit in the pantry without a second's hesitation, the one riding beside Osric in the ambulance holding his hand the whole way while Wendell's driver raced behind them. It was, by every account afterward, an honest and unforeseeable accident, handled about as well as an accident like that could be handled. Beatrice made sure it did not stay that way. By the night of the gala, the lawn of Thornbury House was strung with white lights, a string quartet playing near the fountain, servers in black moving trays of champagne between clusters of Charlotte's business elite and Asheville's oldest families. Wendell stood near the dessert table in his tuxedo, feeling, for the first time in longer than he could remember, something close to peace, until he noticed the way conversation seemed to quiet slightly whenever he passed, the way certain guests glanced toward the terrace where Marisol stood in a borrowed dress Beatrice had insisted staff wear for the event, then glanced quickly away. He didn't understand what was happening until a board member he barely knew, a man named Halloran from the Charlotte office, approached him with an expression of practiced sympathy. "Wendell. Terrible thing about your son's allergy scare. I have to say, I admire your patience. Most men wouldn't have kept a caregiver on staff after something like that. Reckless, is what I heard. Nearly cost the boy his life." Wendell felt the champagne glass go cold in his hand. "That's not what happened." "That's not what I'm hearing from half the lawn," Halloran said, not unkindly, already glancing past him toward the next conversation. "Your mother's been fairly clear about it. Between us, a housekeeper managing that kind of medical responsibility, no training, no oversight. It's not really the woman's fault, I suppose. It's a structural failure. Someone should have caught it sooner." Wendell looked across the lawn and saw Marisol standing near the terrace steps, her face going pale as she watched the whispers ripple outward across the party, guest after guest turning slightly toward her, then away, the way a crowd turns from something it's already decided is contaminated. She hadn't said a single word in her own defense yet. She hadn't been given the chance. He should have crossed that lawn immediately. He should have said, in front of every one of those 200 guests, that the granola bars had come from the estate's own kitchen staff, that the mislabeled packaging was the manufacturer's failure and nobody else's, that Marisol had been the one to recognize the reaction fastest and get Osric to the hospital in time. He knew all of that. He had known it for 3 days. Instead, for one long, cowardly moment, with his mother watching him and the board watching him and 200 of Charlotte's most influential people watching him, Wendell hesitated, caught between defending the woman who had saved his children and protecting the Ashcombe name from a scandal his mother had all but engineered. And in that hesitation, Beatrice moved first. "We are so sorry for the confusion tonight," she announced smoothly to the small crowd that had gathered. "Miss Vance's contract with the family has already concluded. We wish her well." It wasn't true. Not yet. But Wendell didn't correct her fast enough, and by the time he found his voice, Marisol was already walking off the terrace, dignity held together by sheer will, humiliated in front of every person whose respect mattered to the family that employed her. She was gone by morning. The house that had spent months filling with laughter went quiet again within a day. Odette stopped speaking. Not gradually, all at once, the way a door slams rather than swings shut. She sat at the kitchen island the next morning exactly where she'd once sat laughing over dinosaurs, and when Wendell tried to talk to her, she looked through him the way she used to look through strangers, as though 2 years of progress had simply been erased overnight. Osric wouldn't eat. He carried the family drawing everywhere he went, refusing to set it down even for meals, checking every few minutes to make sure it was still in his pocket, as though it might disappear the same way Marisol had. On the second night, Wendell went to check on him and found his bed empty, the back terrace door standing open to the cold. His heart seized in a way it hadn't since the phone call about Celeste's accident. He searched the estate grounds for 45 frantic minutes, shouting his son's name into the dark, imagining every possible disaster a 7-year-old alone at night could stumble into, before he finally found him at the edge of the property, sitting by the garden wall where Marisol had helped them plant Celeste's daffodils, shivering, trying to find his way to a bus stop he had no real plan for, saying only, over and over, that he wanted to find her, that he needed to tell her they didn't blame her, that it wasn't her fault. Wendell carried his son back inside and sat with him until dawn, and somewhere in those long silent hours, he understood exactly what he had done. Marisol had spent months teaching him that his children needed him in the room, not managing the crisis from a safe distance. And the first real test of that lesson, he had failed in front of 200 witnesses, choosing his mother's version of the story over the truth he'd known for 3 days. Marisol did not spend those 2 weeks simply waiting by the phone. She went back to her old life the way she'd trained herself to after her mother died, 2 jobs, long hours, the particular numbness of staying too busy to feel the size of what she'd lost. Teo watched her scrub the apartment counters at midnight for the 3rd night in a row and finally said what he'd clearly been holding back. "You're doing the thing again," he told her, arms crossed, standing in the kitchen doorway the way he had the night Wendell first showed up. "The thing where something hurts too much so you just clean until you can't feel your hands." "I'm not doing anything," Marisol said, not looking up from the counter. "You cried in the car the whole way home from that party and you haven't said one word about it since." Teo's voice was gentle but unrelenting, 19 years old and somehow steadier than she felt. "You always tell me the truth doesn't have to sound impressive to matter. Maybe try taking your own advice for once." Marisol set down the sponge. She sat at the small kitchen table across from her brother and, for the first time since the gala, let herself say it out loud, that it wasn't just the humiliation that hurt, though that was bad enough. It was that she'd let herself believe, for the first time in 3 years, that she was allowed to belong somewhere. That 2 children who'd lost their mother had drawn her into their family before she'd even let herself hope for it, and one bad night on a lawn full of people who'd already decided what she was worth had been enough to take it all away. "I knew better," she said quietly. "I told myself not to get attached. I did it anyway." "Maybe getting it wrong doesn't mean you were wrong to try," Teo said. She didn't have an answer for that. But she thought about it for 2 weeks, turning it over the way she turned over everything, refusing to let herself hope Wendell would actually make it right, refusing, just as stubbornly, to let herself stop hoping entirely. The next morning, Wendell walked into the study where Beatrice was having coffee and, for the first time in his adult life, spoke to his mother in a voice that left no room for negotiation. "You engineered that," he said. "The rumors. Dr. Yates. All of it." Beatrice didn't deny it. "I did what I thought was necessary to protect this family." "You nearly destroyed it," Wendell said. "Osric ran away from home last night trying to find her. Odette hasn't said a word since the gala. You wanted to protect the Ashcombe name, Mother, and instead you taught my children that the one person who ever made them feel safe can be erased in a single evening because she doesn't have the right last name." He set down his coffee. "I'm fixing this. Today. Publicly, the same way you broke it." He found Marisol at her apartment above the laundromat on the east side of Asheville, where her brother Teo let him in with a wary, protective look that softened only slightly when Wendell asked, humbly, if he could speak with her. Marisol stood in the small kitchen with her arms crossed, and Wendell understood, looking at her, that an apology alone wasn't going to be enough. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight," he said. "I know I let my mother say that in front of 200 people, and I know I had 3 days to say something true and I didn't. I'm here to tell you I'm going to fix it publicly, Founders Day donors, the board, the press if it comes to that. But that's not actually why I came. Then why did you come? Marisol asked, and there was no softness in it, only exhaustion. Because Odette hasn't spoken since that night. Because Osric tried to walk to a bus stop in the middle of the night to find you. Because I finally understand what you tried to teach me for months, and I failed the first real test of it. He paused. But I'm not here to ask you to come back as an employee, Marisol. I already know that's not enough for you, and it shouldn't be. Marisol's jaw tightened, but she let him keep talking. I will not stay in a house where I'm loved privately and disrespected publicly, she said finally, quietly, and Wendell heard in it every ounce of the dignity his mother's gala had tried to strip from her. That's not a condition, Mr. Ashcombe. That's the line. I've spent my whole life being underestimated by people with money. I won't spend the rest of it being erased by them too. I know, Wendell said. He looked down at his hands for a moment before meeting her eyes again. You told me once that they don't need anyone to fix them. They need someone in the room. I've thought about that every day since. And the truth is, I was in the room that night, Marisol. I was standing 20 feet away from you on that lawn. But I still didn't stand beside you when it mattered. He let that sit, unhurried, unpolished, nothing like the practiced apologies he gave in boardrooms. So here's what I'm actually asking. Not to come manage my children's grief. To come home, publicly, on my terms this time, not my mother's, if you want to. Not because I need someone to fix them. Because they, and I, would rather have you in the room than anyone else in the world. 2 weeks later, Ashcombe Freight and Logistics issued a public correction at a Foundation press event on the same lawn where the rumors had first spread, stating clearly, on the record, that the granola bar incident had been a manufacturer's labeling failure, that the housekeeper in question had acted quickly and saved a child's life, and that the family regretted the confusion caused at Founders Day. Wendell delivered the statement himself, in front of the same board members, the same donors, the same cameras that had watched him hesitate weeks earlier. This time, he didn't hesitate at all. Beatrice, notably, did not attend. He drove to the east side of Asheville that same afternoon. Odette and Osric buckled into the back seat, both of them quiet with a kind of nervous hope neither had put into words. Teo answered the door and let them in without a word, stepping aside to reveal Marisol standing in the small kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression guarded until she saw the two small faces peering out from behind their father's legs. Odette stepped forward first. She was carrying the original family drawing, worn soft at the folds from 2 weeks spent tucked inside her backpack, and beside it, a new one, drawn carefully the night before at the kitchen island with Osric's help, the same for figures, standing together, no longer separated by any gap on the page. Above them, in careful yellow crayon, was a fifth figure, arms outstretched, sitting in the middle of a sun with too many rays, the kind only a child draws. That's Mommy, Osric explained, watching Marisol's face carefully as she knelt down on the kitchen floor to study the drawing, tears already gathering before she could stop them. We didn't replace her. We just made the family bigger. For a long moment nobody said anything. The radiator clanked somewhere behind the wall the way it always did. Teo leaned quietly against the doorframe, watching. Wendell stood back, letting the moment belong to his children rather than to himself, the way Marisol had been trying to teach him to do since the very first week. Odette, silent for 2 weeks, finally spoke, her voice small but certain, her eyes fixed on Marisol's. Will you come home? Marisol didn't answer with words, not right away. She set the drawing down carefully on the counter, knelt fully onto the small kitchen floor, and pulled both children into her arms, holding them the way she'd wanted to for 2 long, silent weeks and hadn't been allowed to. It was a long moment before she trusted her voice enough to answer, and when she finally did, it was quiet, and it was enough. Yes, she said. I'll come home.